Hi, everyone, and good morning. Thank you so much for joining today on our LinkedIn Live to learn more about Blueprint's data virtualization tool, Conduit. My name is Ruthie Senanayaka, and I help run the events here at Blueprint. And if you are not too familiar with what Blueprint is, we are a technology solutions company here, and we do anything from strategy to implementation. And we are so excited to show you what we have and the technology behind our awesome tool. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Claudio, who is our Director of Engineering here at Blueprint. Claudio, take it away.
Hi, Ruthie. Thank you for the intro. My name is Claudia. I run the product engineering team here at Blueprint. A very talented group of engineering data scientists. And one of the products that we build here is Conduit, data virtualization. And as the title suggests, we'll dive straight under the hood of it, and I'll do a live demo all the way through the presentation. And I'm really going to welcome any questions you might have. Interrupt me at any point in time. Ruthie will be letting me know when there's questions on the side. So I'll go over the entire product into every deep corner of it to make sure that the audience understands what we did to build Conduit and understand how the product works. And so let me just share my screen and dive straight into it. Can you see my screen, Ruthie? Cool. So what is Conduit? Conduit is a data virtualization product, and its role is to connect any tool, any consumer to any data source, right? And data sources that we're trying to connect is an ever-growing list of popular data sources from different cloud providers or on-premise files or whatnot. So you'll see sources like Azure SQL, Synapse included, blob storage for an Azure, databases like Oracle, IBM, DB2. If we're going to Amazon S3 or Redshift, Elasticsearch and open source. So all sorts of data sources, and this list is growing. And our next release will have a good set of GCP, Google Cloud Compute data sources available as well. So this list is growing, and we really prioritize it based on customer demand. And the consumer that we support are now represented by the type of endpoint that we support for connecting to the data sources. And you see we expose JDBC, ODBC Thrift endpoint, and that's going to be used by Power BI, Tableau, all these popular BI tools. MicroStrategy, Looker is now providing support for as well. Click and so on. They all used the Spark SQL connector in those tools because we are a Spark SQL endpoint. So if you look at this JDBC Hive 2, this looks very familiar, and it's really the high JDBC endpoint that Spark uses, right? So we show up as Spark for a few reasons I'm going to describe in a moment. In addition to the JDBC, ODBC connectors, endpoints, we also expose a REST endpoint, which is very popular. It's for maximum interoperability. It provides the quickest way to connect to a data source via Conduit. Now, there's no need for a driver. There's no need for a tool. You just use it in your browser, and I'll show you what that means inside. We also support OData endpoints for a select few connectors, and OData endpoints are useful if you want to connect from a tool like Excel, right? So let me just do a quick demo of it to see what Conduit does, right? So let's assume we have I'm going to filter the data sources. I'm going to look at the Elasticsearch connector I have here, and I have a connector connects to an Elasticsearch from an instance of a deployment I'm going to show in a second. you recognize port 9200, that's the elastic port. And I'll skip over all these steps and go straight to the end. I'll come back to the connector anatomy later. And I'm going to use use Power BI to connect to it. So basically, I'm going to copy this Power BI endpoint and go to my Power BI tool, now Power BI desktop. What you do in Power BI, before you see this mashup is already built, you're going to look for Spark as a source. Okay, I'm going to type in Spark here, and I'll find open source Spark Connect. All right, I'm going to paste in the URL that I copied from the management console, but for some reason this is now on a Windows VM and doesn't like that from Mac. I'll choose direct query. The protocol should be HTTP, and that URL I have to type. I'm not going to type it now. Basically, let me connect to the data source. But what I'll do, I'll just go to the recent sources here because I already have it, and it's that URL, right? Demo-conduit that I was going to copy from the source. So what happens when you paste in that URL? Power BI will connect to Conduit and will display all the Conduit metadata, everything that Conduit has to show. And everything that Conduit basically publishes through its endpoints. And from here, you can choose all these connectors. You see all the connectors are prefixed with ES for Elasticsearch, or file for file storage, SQL for Azure SQL, Postgres, and so on. So that gives you a hint of what kind of connector is behind the scene. But there, in the end, all these entities are abstracted as Sparse SQL tables, right? As part of a Sparse SQL database, right? So no matter what's behind the scene, if it's a file in JSON format or a Parquet file, or it's an Elasticsearch index or a DB2 database, they're all being abstracted by Conduit as Sparse SQL tables. So you can preview and work with them in Power BI as if they were Sparse SQL tables and with schema, with fields, and so on, right? So that's how I'm able to build these visualizations here in Power BI. So I'll show what the data is coming from now. I'll switch back to show where this Elastic data is coming from, and a quick detour from Conduit. This is a product that we built at Blueprint as well. It's a video analytics product that stores all the data in Elasticsearch. So what product allows you to go in and analyze a particular video, and the solution will extract the object graph, the object detection. It does event extraction. It finds all the events and traffic, spikes, dives, so on. It finds anomalies. It builds similarity with other videos. And I'll show you another video here that has an anomaly. Like you see this, this is an anomaly, and it's really well extracted here in the anomaly canvas, and so on. So without spending too much time in the video analytics solution, each video is analyzed individually. So all the insights are extracted for the user for a particular video. But the question was, how can I see what's happening across multiple videos, right? And then we said, okay, well, we store all this data into Elasticsearch, and now you can use Conduit. You can go back to Conduit and see what's in that Elastic search database, and do your reporting across all these data pipelines through Conduit. So that's what we do here, right? So I'm looking at that same Elasticsearch connector, publishing. So you see all these indexes that are being now exposed here. Anomaly with all the fields, behaviors, correlations, object counts, reported errors, similarity, and so on. So this allows me now to expose it through the data endpoints to my Power BI. And going back to Power BI, I can now look at the anomalies across all these data pipelines, right? So I put a slicer here, and I can look at the anomalies in the videos I just showed you, with Thailand video compared to intersection 4, which is here, right? So you can see now the number of anomalies, or you can do your own analysis on that. And the same with the object count. You can look at the vehicles across across all the pipelines. You can look at which video has the most vehicle detected. You see Minnesota has about 447,000 vehicles and so on. So this analysis is now enabled because you have full access to that Elasticsearch via Conduit, and you have a simple interface, a unified interface using Spark SQL, which now obviously Power BI can access, right? So that's how easy it is to work through Conduit with your favorite BI tool. And Ruthie, you let me know if there's any comments or questions in the comment section here, and I'm going to check periodically. But you let me know when I stopped it.
I will, yeah. So one is not necessarily a comment, not necessarily a question, but more of a comment. So I've just added that to the screen right here. It says Power BI is definitely a great tool to manipulate and visualize data in different corporate levels. We had another question come up that says, will this video be available to view afterwards? Yes, it is being recorded, so we will make sure to post this afterward as well. So if you have any other questions that are Conduit related, data related, be sure to add it to this chat. And Claudio, I'll be sure to announce them to you as they come in.
Okay, cool. So back to that demo. So I showed you now how I take this endpoint to Power BI and I connect to that Elasticsearch. But what happens under the hood for this, right? So I want to see the queries that were being run, and I have two ways to do that in Conduit. There's the fact that we have Spark as the basically front end. I have access to the Spark UI, and that's exposed. And Spark UI will show me the JDBC ODBC server tab, and that's show me all the sessions for all the users that logged in. You see, I logged in several times here, or other folks that some of my colleagues that logged in and connected. And then you also have the actual queries. You have the queries that are being sent by, and I'm going to refresh here to make sure I have the latest queries. And you see the queries are coming from Power BI in this form. Select some casts from ES-Nash Insights object count, right? So that's the last query I ran. And it says that it's finished. It gives me the latency. What I can also do is now I grab this group ID, which is a correlation ID, right? And that's what allows me to go in now into the product. And then now diving into the operation management side of things, if I go into if I'm an admin, I have a full access to the entire interface of the management console of Conduit, right? And I'm an admin here. And I'm going to go to the monitor tab and to the event log. So what Conduit has behind the scene, it has the entire ELK stack now deployed, Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. So you have a Kibana interface, and that allows you to visualize all the logs, basically, to discover what's in the logs, basically, is emitted by Conduit. So I'm going to go in and find messages, and I'm going to paste in the correlation ID, right? Because I want to know exactly what happened to my one query that came through. Maybe I want to analyze it. Maybe it was an error. Maybe I want to see what the latency. I want to see the decisions that were made. So one way to do that is just search for it. Now, if I found it here, I'm going to sort it. Now, descending, and then I see the full stack of the request. Now, basically, that the fact that the request came via the JDBC interface, running this query as the original query from Power BI, and then the authorization checks are happening here. The decisions made. Now we'll see, do we have to execute it via Spark or via just send the query down, translate it, and send the query down to the source. We'll talk about these things in the connector anatomy. And it gives you all the optimization that we put in. And after the decision is made, now it looks like we're running the query against Elastic directly. So we translate the query, and this is the query that's being sent to Elastic. It's now native Elasticsearch syntax, response time, and basically that's it. That's a successful query. The results were sent back to the client, right? So this gives me the insight into what happens with each query, right? And you have that access as an admin of Conduit, right? Not only that, but we also have metrics. Now we have Grafana and Graphite embedded with the deployment, and each connector has its own dashboard created. So this was the Nash. Nash is the video analytics solution name, and that's why I call it Nash Insights. So if I'm looking at the last 5 minutes, these were the queries that were run, right? And this is the latency that I'm seeing from the client perspective. So what we measure is the latency as measured from the client through Conduit all the way to the data source and back, right? We're not just measuring what Conduit takes to execute against Elastic. That would be this number. If you look at the queries, the fourth from the top, query native mean is 183 milliseconds, and the native standard finish mean, the second latency, the second metric is 339. That's the average latency for the query as perceived from Power BI through Conduit all the way to Elastic and back, right? So that's the native queries. What you see, the other bigger numbers are queries run via Spark now, because there are queries that have to be run via Spark because Elasticsearch does not support them. And we'll talk about those details in a second. But you have basically the metrics dashboard with latency, throughput, and call count for each connector you create, right? So you can see you can analyze the health of your system. The latency is perceived by the client through Conduit, and the overhead that Conduit adds by translating and being in Batman in the middle.
Hey, Claudio, we did have a question come in, and I'm going to bring it up on the screen. So it says, I saw OData connector. Does this handle all non-OData RESTful services as well?
So this is a good question. There's two ways to think about REST, right? So first, I'll switch back to the product. I'll look at the endpoints. So we have a REST endpoint that is the endpoint exposed over any data source, right? And that's a common interface because it allows you to run any query. And let me go through that, right? It allows you to run any Spark SQL query through a REST interface, as if you were running via JDBC. Basically, it's just a different protocol for running Spark SQL queries. So in that sense, it supports any, if that's the answer you're looking for, it supports any data source via this protocol. What we also do, we want to connect to REST services, right? So if you see the data sources list, we have OData in the list. What we're building right now, and this is what's going to show up with 2.5 or 2.6 of Conduit. We're at 2.4 right now. A generic REST connector, basically connecting Conduit to a REST service, right? So that's work in progress right now. We're basically designing that as we speak. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, and we have another question in the chat. I'm going to bring this up as well so you can see it.
Yeah.
So it says, how is data virtualization tool like Conduit prominent or helpful in the analytics world when using cloud databases and reporting tools like Power BI, Tableau, etc.? I would like to understand what benefit it would provide.
Cool, that's a very good question. So if you, the reason we were exposing, now we'll go back to why do we have these endpoints. The reason we're exposing Conduit as a Spark SQL connector is manifold. One is we wanted to have a very popular interface that's supported by any BI tool. It's easy to connect to. You don't need to install a driver, right? There's other tools that allow you to connect, but they will ask you to download a driver in every Power BI desktop or every Tableau desktop product, right? We don't do that because we're using a native connector that's already embedded with each BI tool, right? So that's what Conduit gives you, interoperability with any tool against any data source. Another reason is publishing. Now, if you publish I publish my report to Power BI Online, and the reason to do that is, again, no driver required and no Power BI gateway requirement either, right? So the fact that we picked Spark SQL as our front end and it's embedded in Conduit allows us to immediately publish these reports from Power BI Desktop to Power BI Online and basically share your reports with the outside world. and without requiring the setup of a gateway, for example. So, and also obviously using Sparse SQL, it's now exposes the increases the audience to developers, engineers using REST endpoints, or to data scientists that want to basically connect to various data sources, and they want to do data science from a Jupyter notebook. And I have an example here of a data science Jupyter notebook where you connect to Conduit via the JDBC endpoint. You can use the REST endpoint too, but if you use the JDBC driver, we provide a library, Conduit Utils jar, and it's available via a public blob storage account for somebody to download. You download this jar, and you basically now have the right drivers in Python to connect. Now you connect, and then from then on, you just do SQL, show tables, select, count, even though you're talking to an Elasticsearch index. So as a data scientist or data engineer, you don't have to learn the native syntax of the data source, whether it's Elastic or OData or a database, and those custom protocols for each database. You don't have to load drivers. You work through a JDBC or Spark or REST interface, and you emit Sparse SQL statements. In the future, we want to extend this to ANSI SQL as well, but for the time being, we just support Sparse SQL. So describe me table, show me table, describe me the table, and then you do select count or select any select statement to do your queries. And whatever is not supported by Conduit, like natively by the data source natively, like I'll go into the anatomy of the connector now, since the question is far-reaching. I'll look at the Nash Insights connector, since we talked about it. Elasticsearch. I'll pick that, and I'll go through it, right? So you first connect to the service. You might tell us if it's an Elasticsearch service, it's AWS because it requires some particular setting. Authentication, I'll skip this. Now publish. I'll come back to security later. You now decide as an admin to publish only what you want, right? Because there's every database, every system out there will have a lot more databases, maybe leftovers from experiments, private data set that you don't want to expose, and you just decide as an admin through Conduit, you only expose these data sets. That's all your consumers will see through the endpoint, right? So you have a first level of filtering here as an admin, and then you can do further authorization rules on top of these tables. But then in the virtualization section, you're saying, how do I connect? Well, Conduit will always serve any query from the consumer. If it can translate the query, like in this case, I'm saying, just enable Conduit SQL Engine, which is behind the scene in Spark. We have another prototype built with using Blazing SQL at Rapids AI. If somebody's interested, please reach out to me in private, and I can set up a demo for that, right? That's a powerful engine, but we haven't productized it yet. So Spark is going to execute all the queries that cannot be translated natively. For example, Elasticsearch doesn't support standard deviation or median aggregations, like basic aggregations that you can easily express in Power BI. They're not supported natively by Elasticsearch. So in that case, Conduit will use Spark engine to read the data from the source with predicate pushdown and execute the query in Spark, and still give you the results, right? And at that point, caching obviously becomes a factor here. It helps with the performance, but that's the reasons, I guess, where Conduit will help you. Like, will serve any query against any data source. It will give you, performance boosters, caching policies, the ability to protect the data source from contention. Imagine you have a mission-critical application running against a particular database, and you don't want your analyst or data scientist to just run queries against your database and create contention with that mission-critical app. You can just basically create an ad hoc analytical database by saying, enable connector caching. Conduit will cache all the data from the source, and now all the queries run through Conduit will run against its Parquet store, right? So you're protecting your database from this from queries, right? And everything runs against the Parquet store. And in this case, see for that particular blob storage account, the database was cached here. I'm going to go to another environment to see the Parquet store have more data sets there in a different Conduit deployment. So you see here the flights database from Synapse. We decided to cache that. It's 64.8 gigabytes size on disk here with our own optimal Parquet format, even though it was CSV files around 60 gigabytes in blob storage, or I don't know what the size in Synapse, but it's a lot of data. It's 150 million data points. If it's a CSV format in blob storage, it's going to be around 60 gigabytes. It's very difficult to query. We pull it in. You have your analytical database. All the queries run against our Parquet store at that point, right? So there's many reasons to use Conduit. Hopefully that answers the question. Cool. So now the question, I'll go back to the. Okay, Michael, would caching the database connection help with usage compute cost of a cloud database? Yeah, that's another good reason, Michael. Good question. When you cache basically your data, you can run any number of queries against our Parquet store. You don't incur any potentially expensive Synapse queries cost, right? So you can do your exploratory analysis, your experiments at a much lower cost if you run against basically cloud storage at this point. Or against basically Conduit storage. And something to be said about this, the Parquet store today in this version of 2.4 is either local storage or HDFS, right? So Conduit has its compute engine. For example, in the demo environment, the Spark engine behind Conduit is just on the same, it's shared with the VM. It's on the same VM, so it's all the cores in the on that VM, right? It's single box deployment. That's what Conduit allows us to do by default. But if we want to, we can attach a compute cluster, Spark cluster, to Conduit. So basically, we're offloading the compute from the Conduit VM to an external cluster. Obviously, it's in the same Azure region with the same data center with a VM. And this Spark cluster now is also turned to an HDFS cluster, and all the Parquet data sets are stored into the HDFS cluster. In the next version of Conduit 2.5, we're going to provide the ability to not only use HDFS but also use cloud storage. Like if I'm already in Azure, I want to use blob storage as my Parquet store. If it's a container storage in the same region, I'm going to have the same performance. Or if I'm in AWS, I'm going to use an S3 bucket in the same region. Same with Google Cloud Compute. In that case, basically, we don't have to deal with HDFS and manage HDFS. We can use the cloud storage. But the key here is that the files are going to be stored in an optimized Parquet format, which is optimized based on a number of capacity of the cluster, right? You see 48 partitions, snappy compressed Parquet files, optimized around the number of cores in the cluster, because there were 16 cores, 16 by 3, it's 48 partitions, right? That's the rule that we apply. And that will give you the ability to offload, basically protect your database from either contention or basically reduce the cost of not incurring the queries. Because a lot of times there's a lot of queries in exploratory analysis or in data science that you just don't know what you don't know, and you're just going to explore and discover. So for those, an analytical database like Parquet by Conduit is a very good fit. Cool. Thank you, Michael, for the question. Going back to the demo. So I talked about the anatomy. I talked about the Power BI or the JDBC endpoints. Let me talk about the REST endpoints a bit, which is very popular. So the REST endpoint here, you can go straight into the Swagger. Basically, we provide documentation for the REST endpoint, for somebody who asked earlier. You can immediately test the REST endpoint from the documentation, or better yet, you can go to the query editor. Now, there's a query editor here that allows you to query the data immediately, and this is using basically the REST interface behind the scene, right? There's a query builder with a query editor with the results, right? So I'm going to go to the Nash data set, and I'm going to just select to see the results. And that's using REST behind the scene. All those requests are stored in Elastic. Elastic is our front-end, our back-end database. And there's a there's a class, there's an index called query audit. What we don't have yet, these are all the queries. What we don't have yet is a nice interface in the management console, but that's coming with the next version of Conduit, a query audit interface in the management console, so you can go in and see all the queries. You don't have to go to the Spark UI or Elastic itself for the queries. You'll be able to actually visualize all those queries into the system and audit them in the management console, and then you'll be able to query by user or by period, by time range, and so on, right? So a full interface. Or better yet, you can take this, you can build a connector against Elastic or own metadata and take it to Power BI and do all your exploratory analysis in Power BI against our own metadata. Basically, if I'll create a new connector right now, let's do it quickly. Elastic, I call it local meta. It's going to be local host 92.100. Go next. Let's see if I connect. No, don't save this. So basically, you see all the indexes, and including query audit. I can basically expose this query audit table to, and I'll just do that. I'll finish the connector. I can expose it, no caching, to through the interface for consumption, right? I'll submit. So I created that. So I'm going to go to my query edit there. I should be able to see my queries here, right? So run. Okay, so these are all the queries, right? So I can query and again, I can group by or filter by protocol, by state. I can see the actual statements and so on, right? So you get this access to, you get access to our local metadata by building a connector against Elastic, right? Using Conduit for exposing its own metadata. I'll spend a bit of time on as I promised, on the REST endpoint. So let me see. This is the API, right? So we have documentation for the data catalog API, metadata, query audit, authentication, right? So if somebody wants to program against the API, they have the full documentation here. You can also try it out. First, I need to authorize, right? I need to authorize so I can use the API. So I'm going to go in and grab a token here. See my access token. I'm going to copy it. I'm the admin user. I'll go back to Swagger, and I'm going to paste in my token and authorize. Close. So now I can make any calls because I can make any calls to the API. Let's see what's in my metadata, all the databases. I'll try it out. Execute. So you see, this is the API, and the response comes obviously in JSON format. Let's see if I have. I don't have access to any databases. Oh no, the scope ID. I'll talk about this when we talk about data catalogs. I have to remove this. I don't have any scope yet. So I want to see all the databases. Okay, I get all the databases. So you see, I can. I have the same interface that I was that basically the Conduit management console that uses. I can do that. I can use it to build my own application. And I'm going to go to the query API to execute. And here I'm going to say, let me try it out. Show databases. Execute. It'll be exact same call. It should return the same. It should return the same response. Okay, let's see what did I do here. Show databases, execute. Columns, rows. Okay, I'm a bit confused here. Let me see what have I. Show databases. I should see the databases, but I'm not seeing that for some reason. So demo gremlins just popped on me. Maybe I'm doing something wrong, or maybe I've been. Let me try another query. Basically, I'll try a query from the that I tried in the management console. Copy. Swagger, go back here. Let me paste that in. Execute. All right. And I'm not seeing the results for some reason. I have to look into this. So, but the REST API is working because it's working here, and the it could be a bug that I found, or I'm doing something right now. I can't figure it out, so I'll skip over it. So it happens when you do a live demo that you don't script. So, but this is using the the REST API behind the scene, and in order to prove that, let me prove that, so you trust me on it. I'll show you the network behind the scene, and I'll run the query again, and you'll see that the actual execute is being run, right? This is the header, so it's HTTPS demo query execute. The same query was supposed to run in Swagger, and this is the response. The query ID. Oh, never mind. Okay, now I understand what I did. So basically, this is all asynchronous execution, and it's giving me back a query ID. And then you have to go back as a client and fetch for the results. So basically, you have to go in and do the results query now with the query ID in the URL, right? And that will give you back. It'll tell you it's running first, and then when it's completed, when the status is results ready, it will actually give you the results, right? And the data is here. So that's what I didn't. This is the data, right? So what I didn't do in Swagger, my first call, I had to wait for the query to execute, and then do a results query, basically, which is the next results query here, the next interface to actually run to get my back results. But it's better exemplified here in the execute. The first results gives you the status still running, and the next one basically is give you results ready. So you have to poll for the results for the query to be to be completed and to get your results back. And you have to do the same in the Swagger. Okay, cool. So that's the REST API. Let's see if I have any questions in the meantime.
Doesn't look like we have any new questions, but I just wanted to mention if anyone does have any, feel free to add it to the chat and we will make sure to answer that live. And if you do want a personalized demo, as Claudio said, a lot of these things can be completely customized to you. So we want to make sure you're seeing it in the best way possible. Just email info@vpcs.com. And we will make sure to get in touch with you and get that personalized demo set up. You can also click on the link that I've added in the chat for a Microsoft form where you can fill out that information and we will get back to you that way as well. So we can wait just a couple more minutes to see if we have any other questions. Claudio, feel free to add in any more details and I will pop back in if we get any more questions.
Yeah, let me know, Ruthie. Because I want to show the other feature, basically the connector anatomy, the data catalog, and talk about security, authentication, authorization a bit. So a good feature of the Conduit, a very popular feature amongst our customer, was the data catalog. So this building the catalog allows you to organize your data sets, to describe them, and to annotate them. So any data set that you have, you can go in and whether at the field level, at the table level, at connector level, you can add a tag or a description, right? Like I'm going to put in a query audit latency here for latency for my queries, and then we add a tag. I'm going to save that and add tag latency. That's it. And so in the future, when I come back to my to Conduit, I can go and immediately go and want to work with my assets, because there's a lot of assets. A lot of people create a lot of connectors and publish a lot of data sets. I just want to find one that's talking about the latency, and I'm going to search for it, and it'll give me back quickly, how many data assets I have. Okay, the duration is the field in the what's the breadcrumb will show me the table and the connector, right, that has that field, right? So that's that's what I can find, and this will show me immediately in the browse here. How do I get to that field? It's duration from query added from local metadata. So I say, okay, I want to work with this table, but since there's so many assets, how can I actually scope out? How can I make sure that when I go to Power BI, I don't see all the data, all those assets? I want to just see the one that I care about. So what you can do then, you can create an endpoint based on your scope. You can add multiple assets to your scope here and create an endpoint. So get endpoints for this asset, right? So you see now my endpoints are similar to what you saw in the endpoints screen initially, but now you have a GUID attached at the end, right? You have this GUID, so that's the scope ID. And let me choose the REST endpoint again. So if I choose my REST endpoint, I'm going to copy this. I can just go to, let's see, if I go to the browser, I have to provide authorization, so that's not going to work. But I can go to Swagger to choose my to do my analysis. Sorry, not the help. I want to go to Swagger and basically look at the metadata API here and paste in the try it out and see, paste in the GUID, right? I'm going to paste in the GUID because that's going to create the same URL. So I'll just copy my GUID, remove the rest, and execute. And that should only give me, let's say it says I'm not authorized, authorization required, so I need to copy my access token. It's good. I copy my access token, copy it because I'm a new REST client. I'll authorize first, paste, authorize, good. And I'll go back and re-execute. So that should give me only the local meta, only the table schema that I care about, that I basically exposed, right? If I remove the rest, of the scope ID, I'll get a full-blown meta store, basically everything that's exposed via Conduit, right? So that's what the catalog allows you to. So it allows you to manage, to tag, to organize, and then to basically create these scoped URLs that you can take to your favorite tool and only allow you to work with your data sets that you care about.
Hey, Claudio, we had another question come in. This one says, can you handle pagination with the REST endpoint?
Yeah, very good question. Yes, pagination is built into that. So I'm going to show the query API here in the REST endpoint. So execute or cancel. Now we're going to make our best effort to cancel the query, especially if it's a large running query via Spark. You want to be able to cancel it too. And then if you look at the query result, query ID, the query execute, actually, when you do the execute, you specify the page size, right? So you have to specify the page size, and you'll basically get pages of results. And every time you get the results, you'll get a has next, true or not. So you'll know exactly if there's more pages to come, so you can ask for the next page, right? But you fix your page size when you do the execute. Yeah, so hopefully that answers the question.
I think those are all the questions. Is there any last things you want to mention before we close it out today?
No, I mean, it's, we could go on to authorization. We support single sign-on with Active Directory and set up for that, or you can support our own authentication mechanism where we store username and hashes of passwords in our own database. They're both supported. And I guess now there's a lot to talk about the engine performance and partitioning, and but I guess we could have follow-up if somebody is interested into performance of the connectors and all the decisions we make there and how we monitor, how we instrument that. That'll be subject for another time.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Claudio. I so appreciate you taking the time to go over all of this really in depth and dive deep into the technology behind Conduit. Once again, if anybody does have any further questions, you can either follow up with an email to info@bpcs.com for that personalized demo, or you can even connect with Claudio on LinkedIn. I'm sure he'd love to answer questions on there as well. But thank you all so much for joining, and we hope you have an awesome rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.